Hey everyone, welcome back to the It's a Mind Game podcast. My name is Jade. I'm a personal trainer and mindset coach specializing in HA and ED recovery. And today I'm joined by the wonderful expert nutritionist in HA recovery, Claudia.
Hello, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Nice to see you again,
I've never
Jane.
seen you before.
Never
But
seen you before.
something
The first
does ring a
podcast.
bell. Our first podcast popped up on my Facebook not long ago, actually. It was over 2 years ago now.
Happy anniversary.
And I guess a little inside scoop for anyone who's listening to the podcast that is well familiar with the both of us now is that our relationship built from you coming on that first podcast episode. And then we're like, I feel like we've got a few things in common. I feel like we share this vision. And here we are, two and a bit years later and loving every bit of the experience.
Absolutely. And now you're my partner in crime and also my bestie. So I'm so glad about that podcast.
It's we were mentioning before the podcast started that I've actually met up face to face with some women that I've had on the podcast and clients as well, and then it's come up multiple times. You've met Claudia though, haven't you?
No.
I'm like, don't remind me, because we haven't actually met, and I only bring that to the forefront because Claudia is absolutely one of my best friends, and yet we've only been virtually interactive for 2.5 years.
I'm coming. Don't worry, I'm coming, Jane. I'm coming to see you.
Come, open arms. Come on over. Oh, dearie me. But today we have a juicy topic, and I actually can't wait to dive into it because it's been really prominent in the HA community with the group calls that we've been having and also with one-on-one clients. And that is food labels. If we are working on food freedom and having confidence with food choices and letting the reins go, is it a sin, let's say, to be checking food labels?
A sin is definitely a big word. I would say that checking food labels can potentially be problematic if you're in the process of recovering from an eating disorder for many different reasons. So checking food labels can lead to obsession and anxiety, perfectionism, can really trigger calorie counting, macro counting. It can lead to food avoidance. So and there may be many different reasons why checking food labels during ED recovery is not optimal. But I think that today it's also going to be important for us to shed some light of why checking food labels can be very empowering and very helpful, especially when it comes to hormonal restoration and fertility and pregnancy, of course. And you know all about this right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I was so excited to open up this conversation, because I think we might break it down into two parts. So HA and ED space, and then pregnancy, just so that sometimes we speak in tongues, but it's a little bit confusing. He doesn't speak Jade and Claudia language. But when in HA and ED recovery, I think there's this perception that food freedom means you can eat absolutely anything you want when you want, and you shouldn't have let's say, I refer to them as health values in regards to making food choices. It should just be, I want it, I have it. If I feel like it, I have it. And there's definitely a positive in that thought process, because if you've been restricting for a really, really long time, that idea of just have the cupcake, have some pasta. If you feel like 2 apples, have 2 apples. You don't have to have one. So I can see where that statement's been like the foundation of the statement, which is just like, have a go, experience it, see what it's like, see how your body feels. But I think it's now at a point where it's been taken perhaps a little bit too far, where the idea of, if you look at a food label to categorize if you want to eat something, that you shouldn't be looking at labels, because if you're criticizing the sugar content, the fat content, the protein content, the carb content, that's your disorder showing. And I guess to break it down a little bit more, for me personally, when I think about labels, I think the emotion attached to whatever we read is more important than the actual thing that we read. So as an example, if you've got a muesli or a cereal and you've got 2 options available to you, and you're just looking at, they both look really great. Turns out one's got a little bit less sugar. Cool, I'm happy with that. And you go for the other one. it's a very neutral decision. There's no heart rate racing. There's no 10,000 thoughts attached to this one measurement. It's just, oh, look, both look good. I do prefer a less sugar muesli. I'll just pick that one. Where the issue may lie is if you're looking at these two labels and perhaps the one in higher sugar, you actually go, oh, but it looks really tasty. Like perhaps it's got something really yummy and appealing in it. No, you can't eat that though. You've seen that there's sugar in it. You've seen that this, and if you eat it, you're going to get fat. And if you eat it, people are going to think you don't care about. You have 10,000 thoughts or a tornado of thoughts attached to the data that you're reading. And I think that's the only time where reading labels is an issue, because you're not being logical about it. You're being emotional. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely agree. I'm a big price shopper, meaning that whenever I go to the shops, I always compare pricing. And sometimes you pick up a muesli bar or a protein bar, which says high fiber, high protein, and it costs almost double the amount compared to another one. And then when you check the ingredient list, the one that says high protein has sometimes the same amount of protein of the other one at a much higher price, simply because of marketing. Different example, I went to the shop the other day with my daughter. She's almost 6 years old, so I'm trying as much as I can to give her the best food that is available on planet Earth, even though she has a very sweet tooth. And if you ask her what are your favorite foods, are pizza, ice cream, cookies. But anyway, that's beside the point.
Shock horror.
Yeah. So she wanted to grab some stringy cheese, and I don't know if it's very common in Europe and in the US, but here in Australia, everywhere you go, you can actually pick up this stringy cheese. And there were two different types of stringy cheese, one next to another, and there was $1 difference. So I got really curious. How is that possible that there is a $1 difference for cheese? So kind of the same food and the same number of cheese sticks inside. And I turn it over, the amount of ingredient on the cheapest one was unbelievable. There were somewhere between 20 and 25 different type of things written on it, including natural flavoring, which, as you know, they can list whatever they want underneath the label of natural flavoring. Plus, there were lots of other ingredients with E, F, and I attached to it, which are all the things that I'm trying to avoid, especially now that they have also come to a conclusion that there is a very strong connection between ADHD behaviors and food coloring, especially in food that are normally given to kids. And so that's one of the reasons why I find that checking food labels can be very empowering. When I find that it's not empowering is exactly for the reasons that you've just so beautifully explained, when there is an emotional attachment and when it can also change your choices, meaning that, for example, if you wanted to have, let's say, a croissant, and you go to the shop and you buy the croissant, you check the full labels, and all of a sudden you notice that it's very high in carbohydrates and very high in calories. And then only because of the amount of calories, you make a decision to not have it. And you decide instead to go for a different choice, for example, like rice crackers or corn thins or like a slice of thin bread. Then I would definitely say checking full labels is not helpful, is not resourceful. But if women and people in general are checking full labels because they want to be empowered and they want to know what the food industry is actually giving them, then absolutely yes. I think that it's a great idea, because we need to make an informed choice when we decide to purchase anything on the market.
Yeah, and I particularly love the example you gave with the cheese sticks, because I've been asked quite a lot lately, Jay, do you read food labels? And I do. I very confidently read food labels, because when I read them, I attach my food values to them. So for me personally, and again, I'm not sharing this so everyone goes and adopts what I value in food, because I actually think that can be quite a unique thing to the person to have food values. But for me, I like super simple things. I would rather things that are lower in processed sugars. I would rather minimal ingredients versus 25 ingredients. I would rather less artificial flavorings and colors and all those sorts of things. And if you notice my language, I'm saying I prefer, I'd rather. So if I'm at a friend's place or my parents' place or wherever, and they've got a product out on the table that I know has some of the ingredients that I'd rather not have, but it's the only food available. I'm peckish. I'm going to go have a nibble. I'm not avoiding that food because I've seen the label and I know what's in it. It's just when I'm shopping for my pantry, I have my little criteria. But if I'm out and about, it's a bit more negotiable because they're little one-offs. And for me, I find that relationship quite balanced and quite healthy. And it empowers me as well, because 90% of the time I'm making food choices that fulfill my food values, right? And I guess a key thing to know as well is it's not calorie focused. It's not like sugar only focused. It's kind of all the variables put together. And therefore, when I go grocery shopping, it's actually a very pleasant experience, because rather than looking at the 5 different varieties of sauce or biscuit or whatever, I can just go, for the most part, minimal ingredient, like clean, whatever. And that gives me confidence. And I think what's quite powerful is what you brought up about Luna as well, and I do the same with Cosima, is it's actually quite caring to pay attention to what's in the food we're eating, right? As long, again, as it's not emotional, it's like, well, if we're responsible for putting the food in front of our kids, we actually want to make sure we know what's in them. We want to try and set them up for success, and we want to try and make sure that their tummies are settled and their digestion's good and their energy's balanced. And the kind of respect we show our kids in feeding them well is also the respect we should show ourselves.
Absolutely. And it's not supporting an eating disorder, it's supporting your health. So let's say that you have 2 chocolate cakes because you really want to have a chocolate cake, and you check the full labels, and then you quickly notice that in one of the 2, there is less coloring, less preservatives. I would definitely go for that one. And I love the transparency. It's not only what's inside the food, but it's also where it's coming from. Who has been involved in making these type of foods? For example, if it's a fish, where has it been fished? It's an eco-friendly manufacturer, or from someone that doesn't really care about the environment, because that's also something that I try to support as best as I can. And same as you, whenever I pick and choose the things that I want to buy and bring inside the house, I always love to check the full labels, not religiously. I don't turn everything that I see on the supermarket, just here and there, especially when I don't know an item or it's something new that has just come to the market. But I really want to make that decision, to make sure that whatever I give to my kids and give to myself, respect my values. And my values are to live a long life, have abundant energy, to have regular periods, obviously, and to feel on top of the things that are going on in general. But whenever I leave the house, whenever I go and visit a friend of mine, whenever I go to the supermarket, whenever I go to a restaurant or things like that, I don't care. I simply accept the food, and I'm really grateful of receiving foods from different people without really double checking where it comes from.
Mm-hmm. And I think the flexibility is where you can say the food freedom lies, because it's like, when you can have your value systems attached, and when it's a good time to just kind of go with the flow, i.e. you're out at a restaurant, you're at a cafe, a friend's made you dinner, your mum's made you dinner, you're traveling the world. If you go to a whole new country and you can't read the food labels because maybe they're in another language, sometimes you've just got to go with the flow. But that's where the flexibility and the so-called freedom, I believe, comes from, is that confidently upholding a standard that actually enables you to be healthy while being able to set the priority aside if the environment doesn't suit, i.e. someone else cooking for you and whatnot.
And plus, we completely forgot to mention people that have real allergies and intolerances. Mm-hmm. So if you're suffering from celiac disease, let's say, for example, or if you have an allergy to peanuts, you definitely want to turn the food label and making sure that that specific food doesn't contain any peanuts, any nuts, or any gluten, because otherwise your overall health and the health of the people around you are going to suffer because of it. So, and that's why you can see the difference of why it's important to check food labels, as long as you explained, there is no emotional attachment. And most of all, there is that flexibility, the flexibility of checking them whenever there is the need to do so. When most of the time you can simply just leave them where they are without second guessing your choices.
Yeah, I just have to rate one of my favorite food labels to check that I even say to my friends, because it drives me crazy on the sneakiness of supermarkets and producers and whatnot. But like peanut butter. So as an example, we get Maver's peanut butter, which is like 98% peanuts and then 2% salt, right? But it is pure peanut butter. But then you look at other brands, which I feel like most people will know when I say other brands, but the ingredients is like peanuts, sugar, canola oil, salt.
Yes.
Flavoring, like 10 things. But if you spoke to someone who perhaps doesn't look at food labels and they go, oh, I'll just get the cheapest one because I love a bargain, right? Because who doesn't love a bargain at the supermarket? I definitely do. They can so easily make a choice that's actually not complementing their health just because they don't have the knowledge to flip the label over and go, oh, wow, this actually isn't as much peanuts as I thought it would. And that's another way where actually being aware of food labels can be really beneficial to our health, because we can make better choices for the quality of produce we're consuming.
Exactly. Also, I'm trying to avoid as much as I can any form of palm oil, simply because it has
That's popping up
completely
in so many
destroyed.
things.
Yeah, and it has destroyed the forest of Borneo. Like if you see the difference in pictures, it's just incredible. And all the beautiful gorillas and all the other animals that have been eradicated from that country because of the usage of palm oil. Now things are slowly changing, but palm oil is very prevalent. And we don't really need to consume it. I mean, we can, and sometimes I do because it's basically everywhere.
Yeah.
But if I can choose and support the planet Earth, then I go ahead and do so. Do I have any emotional attachment to it? Yes, a little bit. I don't want those people to destroy our beautiful planet. But does it have anything to do about my beliefs around the kind of food that I'm allowed to eat? Not really. Not really, because I can definitely enjoy it if it's inside of a cookie. I just prefer to make my own cookie with real butter that I know where it's coming from.
I'm grinning because Kasima is also a cookie fan, and you mentioned Luna saying it before. I feel like it's the phase of the age group. Cookies.
Oh my God.
I'm a sucker for a cookie too, I'm not gonna lie. It's always been like a favorite. Let's go to the second half, because I feel like we've covered that quite well.
Yeah.
Why is reading labels helpful if you have recently found out you're pregnant, if you are at the end of your pregnancy? Why should we be paying attention to food labels?
If we are pregnant, simply because, once again, we want to know what's inside the specific food. Some foods are not pregnancy friendly, and that's something that our pregnant woman should avoid. There are some places where they're quite unsafe in terms of grabbing foods when you're pregnant. And also, once again, marketing. There is a very, very common pregnancy supplements that is sold here in Australia, is number one. And is sold as the number one most comprehensive prenatal vitamin in Australia. And when you check the food labels, for example, it quickly shows that it does not contain any choline, which is one of the most powerful minerals, vitamin that you need in pregnancy, as much as folate. It contains folic acid instead of folate, contains very little B vitamins, and contains the kind of magnesium and iron that keep you constipated for days. So without mentioning food specifically, let's take this supplement as an example. Without checking the food labels, a pregnant woman could definitely say to her doctor or nutritionist or whomever she's working with, yes, I'm taking my prenatal supplements daily, and I still don't know why my iron level is pretty low, and I'm getting cramps on my legs, and I feel very lethargic and quite sick. So yeah, I think that's an example that really shows why checking food labels in pregnancy could be once again empowering.
You mentioned some foods that should be avoided, and I feel like a few women's ears would have pricked up with, what should we avoid, Claudia? Could you just run through, I guess, your primary foods to avoid if you're pregnant?
I would definitely say any food that comes from the deli. So if you're shopping at a supermarket, anything that is sitting in brine or has been sitting there for a long period of time. So for example, any soft cheese that it's, swimming in brine, even olives, deli meats, definitely avoid deli meats unless they are extremely and thoroughly cooked. Raw fish, raw meat in general, it can be potentially dangerous. Eggs as well, unless they're boiled, thoroughly boiled. Salads that have been unwashed or have been sitting there for a long period of time, for example, in a salad bar. Sushi, not only because of the raw fish, but also because of the cross-contamination and because of the rice. So rice, it's normally brings lots of bacteria, and if you allow those bacteria to thrive, that can really create havoc inside a woman's body when pregnant. So basically, we're trying to avoid anything that can trigger that can bring inside a person Listeria and Salmonella, which are the two worst bacteria to be exposed to when pregnant, because they can be easily treated when you're not pregnant. But once you're in pregnancy, you cannot take the specific probiotics that can actually help you to feel better in a short amount of time. To top it all off, Listeria is that kind of bacteria that doesn't give the pregnant woman any symptoms, but sometimes, but can affect the fetus, can affect the baby. So these are my generic recommendations. And then obviously there are many more that we can go through, but the list is pretty extensive anyway.
Yeah, I found it really interesting even recently when I found out I was pregnant, went to the doctor, and he said some really bizarre things like, oh, you're on a prenatal supplement, but there was no, what brand does it have these 3 things in it, or just generally assumed that I'd made a really good choice, which thankfully, like, I'm receiving guidance for that level of care, so I trust that what I'm having is suitable. But really, I guess, bleak recommendations, like no raw fish, which is helpful, but and he also said, like, oh, and don't go and sit on a bike, right? Which, as a personal trainer, I know you should be very careful in bike riding, because it's more concerned that if you fall off the bike, you can fall on your belly and cause harm. But the key points just kind of like rolled off his tongue, and I'm like, wow, there is no thought to this at all. And thankfully, having had one pregnancy, being in the health industry, I'm a lot more aware. But as you beautifully highlighted, there's so many women taking supplements thinking that, like, they're doing all the right things, and yet they're getting all these symptoms. And potentially it could be mitigated just by making better choices. But it's that 2 streams of actually knowing how to make a better choice and observing what you should do on labels, whether it be supplements or food, in order to actually help your body get through pregnancy a lot better, because it does deteriorate so many things in your body for all the best reasons, but vitamins, minerals, it really, really takes it out of us.
But also, you mentioned exercise. For example, your doctor told you not to jump on a bike, but there are many different types of exercises that actually need to be avoided. So anything that can really squash the uterus during pregnancy is not the best time to work on the core muscles, but it's better to work on the obliques, making sure also to possibly not to go dancing, because there is that chance of falling, of being pushed by other people, or being poked in the belly. And then I'm pretty sure that there are other recommendations that you could do. Exercise much better than I do, obviously, but also twisting. Lots of women say, oh, I'm doing yoga, so I'm fine, or I'm doing Pilates. But even if you're doing Pilates and yoga, you're not meant to be lying down on your back for an extended period of time. Otherwise, you're going to stop the flow of oxygen to the baby. You're not really meant to exert yourself in general, or to do any twisting. So there is a list of things that pregnant women should be aware of and careful about when carrying a baby, and they're not normally discussed in medical settings for some reason.
Yeah, and I am going to do a podcast in the future about the guidelines for training while pregnant, because there's
beautiful.
It's simplified, it's simple, but it's also detailed. Like, as you brought up, the core side of things, there's certain movements that should be avoided because it's purely just the surface level abdominals. But there's so many that are so beneficial. But to categorize all core or whatever else, so it's easier to the people trying to give across the evidence, but it's not really beneficial to the women who are just, okay, I won't do anything. But something really cool, which I'll discuss in the podcast, is I think it was the American Gynecology and Obstetrics completely threw its recommendations for physical activity on its head in, I think it was 2020. And I won't do a spoiler, but the changes from 2010 recommendations to 2020 are mind-blowing, like absolutely mind-blowing. So I'm excited to share that in the future. But for now, I feel like we've done a very good coverage of food labels, why it's important to have the awareness and knowing how to monitor it in regards to, if you are super emotional, then perhaps reach out to Claudia and we can work out a way for you to show some TLC to those emotions while reading labels. Or if you don't have that emotional element kicking in, you can just confidently going about doing what you're doing without thinking, well, clearly this isn't food freedom because I'm reading information on this package. Is there anything you wanted to add before we finish up?
No, I think that we have covered the subject pretty thoroughly. So I'm really happy I'm actually looking forward to receiving the podcast when you talk about exercise in pregnancy, because that's a topic that it's much needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm super excited. And I've some of the workouts I've been posting on Instagram, I've been getting quite a few messages of both, can you do that? And I didn't know you could do that. And yeah, so I'm very excited to share that, and hopefully women can feel a lot more empowered with training during pregnancy, because it's really good for us to train during pregnancy. But for now, I'll leave all of our contact details in the show notes. If you could like and subscribe or leave a comment, that would be amazing. And ladies, we will see you in the next one.
Bye.